On OneSoccer Direct with Alexander Gange, Ruzik, and Oliver Platt, we are less than 24 hours away from the second legs of the TELUS Canadian Championship finally kicking off. All four matches in about a, let's call it, 30-hour window. 2 matches on Tuesday, 2 matches on Wednesday, a couple all CPL, and a couple CPL v Major League Soccer. Atletico Ottawa and York United will go head-to-head. Cavalry and Vancouver, the CPL side with just 1 win all season, trying to eliminate the league champs from last year and advance to a national semifinal. And then you look ahead to MLS v CPL, which is always a treat. Forge take the advantage to Stade Saputo, Vancouver Whitecaps, and Valor are all square after 90 minutes. From those matches listed, Alex, should we A, be keeping our eyes closest on Forge in Montreal Part 9, it feels like, and B, should we be expecting Bobby Smirniotis' side to oust the struggling MLSers?
Yeah, that feels like the big story, right? Given that Forge and Montreal obviously have a history, because it's now, I guess, somewhere proclaimed in the rule book that we cannot have a Canadian Championship sans the Chouanière Bowl, the Forge Montreal, whatever you wanted to call it.
It can't be Chouanière Bowl anymore, Alex. I came to that terrifying conclusion this weekend.
Yeah, but we can keep calling it because there's the allegiances run deep. But no, so I think for that, it's definitely the most important game in the sense that Forge are carrying an advantage. Montreal have a lot to prove. Like, there's just so much on both sides. Of course, from, us here, our perspective, we're going to be looking a bit closer at Forge, and I think there's so much for them. Bobby Smirniotis, this is another defining moment, like you mentioned, for this squad. They've long mentioned this season, anytime you talk to them, that this is one of their deepest teams, this is one of their savviest, most veteran, smart groups. And the fact that they're, on the cusp of another result, second straight year doing so, they're yet to lose in the Canadian Premier League this year after another victory this weekend. Like, this team for Forge, they almost, if they lose this tie, there's going to be disappointment. There's going to be frustration. But then at the end of the day, this is still an MLS team. This is still a team with quality in there, even if they maybe haven't shown it as much in MLS play for a multitude of reasons. They're at home. They're going to be expected to win. This might be their season. So I think there's just so much intrigue. I still think in the end of the day, Forge is going to win just because of what they showed last year. But there's still a lot of ways this can go. There's no more away goals. Football can be funny.
Ollie.
Yeah, I think there's very little question that it's Montreal's season, with the distance between them and the playoff line in Major League Soccer right now. There's big implications in this match across the boards, and certainly the biggest of the 4, although there are some other good ties that I'm sure we'll get to. Forge, obviously unbeaten still domestically this season, looking to continue that run and get back to a Canadian Championship final. The opportunity for the CPL that's here to have a CPL team in the Canadian Championship final for only the second time, and really the first time, given the other one was the COVID year when it was kind of legislated in that there would be a CPL team in the final. And then for Montreal, what Alex just talked about, the stakes here in terms of their season really resting on this and depending on this, and the difficulty that this club has had seeing off this Forge team over the past couple of seasons. And the most kind of damning thing for me about CF Montreal and the biggest praise you can give Forge is that, yeah, again, like you guys have already touched upon, I expect Forge to progress through this tie. And I think that's a real change from CPL versus MLS ties in the past, where we felt Forge or Cavalry going into those ties have a chance of winning. Now it's kind of the expectation. It kind of feels like the tie is in their favor, certainly with a first leg lead.
To bounce that back, if that's the case, and that's the sentiment from those who watch the sport and the clubs very closely, that Forge should go on or Cavalry should make a run as one of the elite clubs in the CPL, are they, the clubs in this domain, feeling that pressure, or is all of the pressure on the MLS clubs tomorrow and on Wednesday? Vancouver Whitecaps, it would be a gargantuan collapse to lose to Valor. Montreal would be Forge got us again. So we know they're feeling the pressure. Are the CPL clubs feeling that too? Are we at that stage already in this tournament where your results have spoken long enough and now it's time to make a run for this Voyageurs Cup?
To a certain extent, yeah. The biggest pressure is on Montreal, I think, without question. again, because of the stakes here in terms of their very distant MLS playoff hopes, the amount of just pressure in general that's around this team and its future right now. And the feeling that, if we in back-to-back years can't get past a CPL side to advance to, the latter stages of the Canadian Championship, what is going on at this club when that's the case and you're sitting bottom of the MLS standings at the same time. So the biggest pressure is on them. But I do think Forge, Cavalry, even Atletico Ottawa as the league leaders in the CPL will look at this year's competition in particular and see Toronto FC already out, CF Montreal really at risk against Forge in this quarterfinal, and see a big opportunity to potentially be playing in the Canadian Championship final this year, obviously with the redraw, potentially even if Montreal stay in the competition, giving them a CPL opponent in the semi-final for a place in the final. So I do think that does create some pressure. As much as they're still underdogs against the budgets of the MLS teams, they've got to be looking at this year's kind of landscape and pathway and thinking this is as good as an opportunity as we've ever had to be playing for a trophy.
Alex, you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. Plus, I think especially in Forge and Cavalry's case, like this is kind of that last step. Like Cavalry has made a deep run in this tournament before, of course, 5 years, 6 years removed, and they're probably thinking, okay, it's about time we get back to that after, what they did in 2019. Now they've had, multiple years of CONCACAF Champions Cup of, oh yeah, this is what it's like to go up against a Pumas, beat a Pumas in leg one and hold your own. You see what it's like to go up against Orlando City. Like that kind of fear factor has gone away from them. And of course, we know with Forge every year they're in CONCACAF every year, they've gone up against a Montreal. I think the stat is like the only teams that have eliminated them from the CanChamp in the last 5 years have been MLS sides. It's either been Montreal or last year it was Toronto. They've gone up against respectable top end Liga MX teams and held their own. Like that's the standard that Forge have set, that for them, they're looking at this bottom level CF Montreal team that's struggling, that's lacking depth. Montreal put out essentially a pretty close to an A team in leg 1-2, and Forge kind of played them off the park. Like 1-0 almost flattered Montreal when we look back at that tie all the way back in May. Again, wild how we go 2 months between these ties and so much can change. Yet I think for Forge, there's this pressure on them where they have finals or bust. Of course, after that, the draw will determine. I still think the Vancouver Whitecaps are the clear favorites and should be based on the field. But there is this pressure internally with the Forge and Cavalry, at least, that they're good enough to at least push the Whitecaps and have a final be a possibility.
Alex, I want to not necessarily push back against that, but maybe dive in where, yes, it's been 2 months. It feels even longer between matches in these series. You said so much has changed. Has it for Forge and Montreal in particular? Forge still haven't lost. Montreal are still not spending money. Montreal are still at the bottom of the table. With that said, would this be a huge missed opportunity for Forge the way the dynamics of things are? Or maybe are we getting a little carried away with the notion that Forge beats CF Montreal last year and that becomes the expectation to do it every year despite all of the logistics and background surrounds?
It just feels like it would be a huge missed opportunity, right? Because this Montreal team, this is probably the worst we've seen them. Like they still made the playoffs last year somehow. And I think that's also maybe a sign of how easy it is to make the playoffs, unfortunately, in MLS when however many 18 teams make it into the dance. But, this is still a Montreal side that's a few years removed from making a supporter shield push. They still have got a talented academy that can pull out gems every couple of years. This is clearly a low in whatever, rebuild they're going through. You look at the fact that Toronto FC already isn't in the distance. The Vancouver Whitecaps might be distracted if you get deeper into the tournament with, them making a supporter shield push. Forge have to be looking at this tournament thinking, wow, like there's a legitimate opportunity if you get past Montreal, because, of course, the draw could change everything. You get pitted against the Whitecaps. But even then, like with those factors I mentioned, it's 2 legs, distracted Whitecaps. You never know. So, no, it definitely does feel like a big opportunity because the stars have really aligned for Forge to make something happen. But that all goes out a window if Montreal picks up a 2-0 win and comfortably advances. And all of a sudden, the bracket and the dynamic shifts.
Ollie, Alex calls them the worst he's ever seen them, or the worst we've ever seen CF Montreal. Are there any stakes here for them? If they lose, does the pressure get ratcheted up even more? Is it possible to do that if they bow out to Forge? And as you both have said, their season's probably over by Wednesday night.
I think it just certainly adds to the kind of feeling around CF Montreal right now where the future is murky. Like when you look at where Major League Soccer is going and you look at some of the teams they're playing against and the type of talent that they have on the pitch, including obviously this past weekend's, and then you look at Montreal's lineup, like you can look at this team and say, you know, they still should be favored to beat Forge because even some of the players in their team have been top CPL players in the past, right? Laturi, Sirois, as well as the international talent that's there. But I don't know, you just look at the 11 and there's not a lot of longer tenured players like Forge have that kind of have those relationships and have developed their style of play over a longer period of time. There's not a whole lot of difference makers that I think Forge will really truly fear as much as there's some players that they're obviously going to have to pay attention to. There's just not really anything like the kind of conviction that you see from this Forge team, even if the talent level should always be tilted in favor of the MLS club. So it's a big question to kind of get into is what does the future hold for CF Montreal? And I think this is just another week where that is kind of tested. And if they do crash out of this competition at this stage to a CPL side again, it's just going to renew the questions of, you know, what is this club trying to do? How are they trying to build? And what does the future actually look like for them in a league in MLS, which is changing very rapidly?
Okay, that's just one of our 4 quarterfinals. Forge will take a 1-0 lead into Stade Saputo. Reminder, away goals do not matter in the 2025 TELUS Canadian Championship. So Forge just start the match with a 1-goal advantage. That is the case as well for Atletico Ottawa, who are up on York United. Valor and Vancouver Whitecaps had played to a 2-2 draw. The Portuguese midfielders really showed out. A couple of glorious goals for Phil Dos Santos' side before really needing to buckle down and just get to full time all square. And last but certainly not least, Cavalry in Vancouver. Maybe a bit of a surprise that their match finished 1-1 in leg 1, and it'll all come down to Atco Field on Tuesday night. Of these 3 remaining quarterfinals, Ollie, what is the juiciest storyline or the match you'll be keeping the closest eye on?
I actually am looking forward to York against Atletico, and I know we've seen them play quite a bit already this season.
14 times already, I think.
So it's not a new matchup, but I think the games generally have been pretty good. They're 2 teams that I like watching. They're entertaining teams, attacking teams. And again, I just think they'll look at this competition and the opportunity that's in front of them. Certainly Atletico Ottawa as a top of the table team will fancy themselves to go through and to potentially make the final of this competition. But I think York United are rapidly improving week by week and are obviously on a decent run themselves over the past month or so. So that one I think feels like one where, like you said, the other 2 Whitecaps heavy favourites against Valor. They have to be at home, and I'd say the same about Cavalry with Vancouver with the way things have been going for Vancouver lately. But Atletico against York still feels like it's somewhat up for grabs, even with Ottawa obviously having the edge.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm going to go Vancouver Cavalry, funnily enough. I think that one, there's just something about it in the sense that, like I mentioned earlier, Cavalry, they haven't been deep in this competition in a while. For whatever reason, there's been obstacles. You know, Pacific in 2021 getting one of their rarest, rare wins at Atco Field, and some other defeats like the Whitecaps barely getting past them last year. This is a great opportunity for Cavalry at home, get the job done, continue a good run. At the same time, Vancouver, this for them, not to say it feels like their season, but it's kind of trending towards that point when you only got 1 win and the playoff line is drifting further and further away with how good York's been lately. All of a sudden, like, you lose this CanChamp tie, the second half of the season could end up, quickly having nothing to play for, so to speak. And Vancouver does kind of have a bit of that energy where they're going to be up for this. They gave Cavalry a good game in leg 1. They probably should have left with the result. Funnily enough, that's probably the big story heading into this, is they've played Cavalry very close each time this year, and they've just been Warshevski'd every time. So just keep a guy glued to Warshawski the entire time, and that maybe they'll have a better chance than they've had where they've played them well, and then he'll just pops up with a 88th minute equalizer or winner. But I think there's some genuine intrigue in that one because Vancouver making a semifinal all of a sudden could really invigorate them. Some of their young players as well could get a huge boost from potentially playing an MLS side, them hosting an MLS side like the Whitecaps. There could be some intrigue in a matchup like that. Like, lots to watch there.
Okay, so I hosted match night on Saturday night with Jordan Wilson and Jimmy Brennan. We asked a similar question. The two of you took a similar path without knowing it. No one is mentioning the fact that Valor and Vancouver Whitecaps are tied, and are as if you're all dismissing them to suggest that there is no chance. What if they just put all 11 players in the net and go to penalties? We haven't discussed that possibility. They are 90 minutes or shootout away from defeating the reigning champions who might not even make CONCACAF Champions Cup next year despite reaching the final this year if they're shaken by the Winnipeggers. They've lost to Cavalry on multiple occasions in the past few years, boys. Are we forgetting all of this? Does Phil Dos Santos' side really have no shot, Alex?
Oh, Phil, they have every shot. Phil Dos Santos' side. I think no away goals is they're the big winners here because the Whitecaps in the old format, 2 away goals. I think this is done and dusted. Now, like you mentioned, Valor can get a goal, shake up the tie. You know, maybe they, like you mentioned, play a draw. I just think for the Whitecaps, there's more at stake now because of their recent form. The fact that it's just been such a frustrating month. They're going to have to go a little stronger than this, I think, especially at home too, and kind of recorrect the vibes, so to speak. So I think for Valor, unfortunately, they get the Whitecaps at the wrong time. You almost want a distracted Whitecaps that are flying, that are cruising we can just throw out a B team here. I think the Whitecaps won't feel necessarily as they have that luxury, especially like all of a sudden a guy like Brian White played 8 minutes at the Gold Cup? He might all of a sudden be a candidate to start just to get him some minutes, get him some form. Jade Nelson picked up an unfortunate suspension. I say unfortunate for Valor because now he's likely going to start, and that's another difference maker you have to deal with for 90 minutes. So I think for Valor, it's very much not forgotten. I just think the Whitecaps are going to go a little stronger than we thought they might have 2 months ago.
Yeah, look, I hope Valor can give them a game, but I think at some point, it's not on us to pump up their chances. Like, they've got to go out there and demonstrate exactly why they should be taken seriously in a game like this, because they've lost 3 in a row, 3-0, 5-0, and 3-1 in the CPL. And now they're playing the Whitecaps, one of the best teams on the continent, albeit a team that's obviously been stumbling since that Champions Cup final, but still, as Alex mentioned, some attacking talent potentially starting that you might not have expected to start. And I think they have some decent depth defensively as well. So it's going to be a pretty strong side. I would love to believe that Valor can give this a real go, but the recent performances just haven't suggested to me that they can.